Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming. I appreciate you all, whether you are watching this conversation, which is going to come in 1 or 2 minutes with Scott Horton on YouTube or on Rumble. I just wanted to do this solo introduction at the beginning because in the past 4 streams, I couldn't do the streams because of very bad illness. I haven't had such bad flu or whatever virus that was for a very long time. I don't remember that I stayed in bed for 4 days. So I just want to apologize for not being able to do the live streaming in the past 4 days. But today I forced myself to do it because I have a very respected guest with me, and I would like to, I think he doesn't need much of an introduction, Scott Horton. Scott, he is an anti-war activist, a libertarian political historian, and author of 5 books, and the host of Scott Horton Show. He is also the director of the Libertarian Institute and editorial director of antiwar.com. His recent book is Provoked: How Washington Started the New Cold War with Russia and the Catastrophe in Ukraine. Scott, I'm very happy, pleased, and humbled to have you on my YouTube conversation. Today we're going to speak about a very controversial issue, and I watched some of your recent conversations about this case, and I found you are the best candidate for this. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate that.
Did you know that your book in Germany is rated 5 out of 5 on Amazon? And this is not only 1 or 2 people reviewing your book, Provoked, actually. It's 120 people reviewed your book, and those are verified reviews. And the first review says, a thoroughly well-researched book essential to our understanding of how this conflict evolved. Actions of the guilty parties in Washington and globalists going back to the early 1990s lay bare the full extent of their greed, hypocrisy, and hatred. The second verified comment says, facts only, no room for emotions and ideological Western propaganda. This book will literally tell you everything, and I mean everything, there is to know about this conflict. As you may have guessed, it's slightly more complicated than the bad Putin and the good Zelensky. So for those guys interested to read the book Provoked, you can find the link, of course, in the description below. You can purchase it from the United States and also from Europe. Scott, this topic that we're going to discuss today is very dear to me, not only because I come from the Middle East, because myself, I'm an ethnic Armenian, which means 100 years ago, my parents were ethnically cleansed from Eastern Anatolia, and they walked through the deserts, and they survived the genocide, and we were resettled in Syria. So when there is an ethnic cleansing or a genocide, I know that there is an ethnic cleansing or a genocide. There is no denial about that, what is happening in Palestine nowadays. But I would like to take one step back so that we can contextualize this crisis and the conflict together. I would like to go back to October 7, not like in the style of the Western media that the time starts in October 7, just for us to understand what is your perspective on the day after October 7. Do you believe that the Israeli forces and the intelligence were caught off guard, or they were watching the preparation of Hamas and they let it happen? Because in my opinion, it makes difference for me, because if it's the second and let it happen, then there is an insidious intentions from the Israeli side to let it happen, to commit such a heinous crime against the Palestinians. I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, listen, I try to be very conservative and minimalist in my interpretations of these type of things, and I think there's a very strong case. I mean, hell, you can find me guilty if you want to say it this way, but like the New York Times version of the story is, man, they could have stopped it if only they'd been doing their job better. And I tend to err on the side of that, since we don't have, hard proof that they deliberately let it happen. We don't have a general saying that another general told him that, no, turn your blind eye until 4:30 or what, you know what I mean? We don't have like outright they're caught. But I will say that there are quite a few different people who have made a circumstantial case that, combined different reporting from Israel and the United States about various bits of information that the Israeli government did have in their possession in the run-up to the attack. So then the question is, how well was this information being synthesized and integrated into any one person's head who was in charge of calling shots here? Did Netanyahu and his ministers really know everything they needed to know? And did they turn a blind eye to it? I think it's a fair question. I don't think that it's like a too conspiratorial of a thing. Like, if the question is Netanyahu a dirty enough son of a bitch to do something like that, to allow this to happen to his own people that he's in charge of protecting in order to have this excuse? I could see it. I don't think that that's outside the realm of possibility, as horrific as that is. On the other hand, I mean, security is a government program and they suck. So I think there's a lot of presumptions about, the ability of the US government and or the Israeli government in these different circumstances to be able to spring into action and do the right thing, like you might imagine. Like in the case of Benghazi, there's a whole lot to that story. But part of the story was, where is the military? How come they're not flying in from Italy and saving us right now? And then to hear the military tell it, like, yeah, right, dude. We're waiting until the sun comes up and then we'll send a helicopter to assess the situation, and whatever. We're not just flying in there and dumping troops on the ground and have an adventure and see what happens and hopefully win. No, we're going to take our time and see. Everybody's dead by then. You know what I mean? But that's just how they are. So,
Yes.
in the case of Israel, like on the minimalist story, was these religious kooks on the West Bank had held their Sukkot, harvest festival thing, and that they had pulled a bunch of IDF soldiers away from the Gaza so-called border to the West Bank to babysit these settlers. And another thing was, and this is straight out of Idiocracy, right, is the automatic machine guns outside the prison, right? Like they did have this. And of course, Hamas, the first thing they did was attack all of the automated security systems, all the cell phone towers and all the cameras and sensors and whatever with drones, and, drop little magnesium or thermite charges on them, right, and burn them through and blow them up. And so that, again, this is like the Times version, right, is that, well, within 45 seconds or within whatever, the first few minutes of the attack, the first 10 minutes of the attack or whatever, the Israelis are now flying deaf, blind, and stupid. They have no idea what's going on. Everybody's guessing and whatever. And then, it's easy to presume, and it should be fair to presume. Like, I'm not saying this is wrong but it's pretty easy to presume that there's a room full of people who are synthesizing all the information coming in, and a small committee of them, 3 or 4 or one guy in charge, is now calling shots based on all the latest, best information that we have, and is going to be smart and do the right thing and whatever. I think a lot of times in a crisis, people just stand there and wait for somebody else to do something and that kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
but part of this probably too is back in the 1990s, I was much more of a conspiracy kook. I was a kid, I don't know. I was much more willing to leap to conclusions or jump to conclusions and make the worst case interpretation of things. And then, you know what? Usually that stuff doesn't turn out to be right. Usually the kind of worst interpretation doesn't, and it's the more conservative account that does, hang together in the end. So
our personalities are growing in an opposite direction. I was more of a conservative in my childhood. Now I'm getting more suspicious. I mean, what happened on October 7 is, for me, raises lots of alarms, because the Egyptian intelligence, they have warned the Israeli side, and there are now some Israeli officials coming out and say, like, there were loopholes in the intelligence, some of which were, of course, man-made loopholes, and some of which were technological. But it will take time for us to understand. But what we know for sure now, that the Hannibal directive was enforced. And Yoav Gallant now comes and says that we did it. So in 2017 or 2018, the IDF basically claimed that they retracted the Hannibal directive and they no longer want to enforce the Hannibal directive. And on the day of October 7, they never claimed that they have enacted the Hannibal directive, because we don't know then how many of the casualties among the Israelis themselves were killed by the Israelis. But now we know that the Israelis definitely have killed some of their captives or some of their hostages, and also the soldiers in this case, or Israeli civilians in this case. And the footage.
Now, just to be clear about that, right? Like for people who aren't too familiar about it, the Hannibal directive is not kill all your own people so that you can cry and pretend you're a victim later. The Hannibal directive is to kill your own soldiers if they're being kidnapped. That was where it was invented. There was this guy, Shalat, I believe was his name, was the IDF soldier who had been kidnapped by Hamas and held in Gaza for years and was finally traded for like 1,300 people or something like that. And so they said, we're never going to let that happen again. So now if an IDF soldier is being kidnapped, go ahead and kill him with his kidnappers if you have to prevent him from being taken hostage in there, which is horrible. And we're talking about conscript 18-year-olds here. Like this is absolutely horrific anyway. But then extremely importantly, as we, and I'm sorry, I don't know the footnote for this offhand, it may be Ynet, but I know people can find this, and it's, I believe, firsthand quotations that they ordered and conceded that they ordered mass Hannibal. So now this is on the fly. They're saying not kill one soldier if he's being taken by a group of Hamas guys, but kill any Israelis, even civilians, even little old ladies or dancing girls from the club or whatever. Anyone being kidnapped and taken into Gaza, go ahead and kill them. And then in some cases, they weren't even being taken into Gaza. They were holding hostages inside a house at a kibbutz, completely surrounded, nowhere to run anyway. And they blew the house away. So there's at least one case of that. I don't know every little detail. And I do plead like a little bit of fair ignorance on this, that I spent the last year writing my book, and the Gaza thing, when it broke out, it cost me like 3 or 4 months. And then I had to quit Twitter, and I would interview one of my guys from antiwar.com once a week about Gaza, but otherwise I have my nose buried in Russia-Ukraine issues for the last week. And so I knew I was making a choice there. Like that, I just had no choice but to not be completely immersed in all the details of what all was going on with the Israel-Gaza conflict this time, because I just couldn't.
There is one.
There is my radio show in LA about it every week to make myself like at least feel better about not focusing on it.
No, actually, your recent statements on this was quite on point. But there is a point that I'm making here in the Gaza issue. Some people find it provocative because, people want to see what is politically convenient for them or their opinion. And I'm trying to be objective in this case, although it's very hard to be, especially the Palestine case, very dear to my heart as well. Now, when the October 7 happened, in my opinion, the Israeli plan was from day one ethnic cleansing. So that's why even the European officials came to Egypt. They met with Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and they were trying to persuade him to take in the Palestinians. But then when the neighboring countries rejected to take in the Palestinians, then Israel decided to commit genocide against the Palestinians in order to force them to leave the Strip. Now, we have a ceasefire agreement. I mean, fast forward 13, 14 months, we have a ceasefire agreement. People come and say, Gaza is victorious. Gaza emerged victorious. And this is something that I would like to be very cautious about it. And I can't say Gaza has emerged victorious, because Israel has achieved one of its goals in Gaza, and that is the act of genocide against the Palestinians, because in this case, there is no standing building, the infrastructure is completely decimated, and the people's livelihoods is hell on earth. So what Israel has basically done, it has destroyed the Palestinian people as an ethnic or religious group there, in part or in whole. They destroyed their livelihood. Now, nobody will be able even to reconstruct the Strip. So I would argue that genocide itself was a goal of Israel, and not something on the side, on the periphery, that we have to we have to give it a matter of priority, and not to say that no, the Palestinians have emerged victorious. Yes, those who survived the genocide, they are victors because they are alive. But Israel now and the Palestinians are in a very, very fragile situation, especially that in the neighborhood, regime change happened in Syria. Hezbollah has been localized, and Iran took one step back and didn't follow suit with its promise, which is the Operation Promise Tree.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot there, but yeah, I don't know anyone who's saying this is a great victory for Hamas. I mean, with an insurgency, what they have to do is not lose. right? And so they're still alive at great cost to themselves and to the Palestinian people of the Gaza Strip. It's just horrific. And you're right that, you know, people, they hear the G word, and a lot of times it gets thrown around too much. Genocide this, genocide that, all the time about this, that, the other thing. Here we're talking about like high tens of thousands. They said it was like 50,000, but I'm sure it's many more than that killed. But fewer than 100,000 people. You did not have, you know, they did not send in B-52s and just carpet bomb the tents, right? They did bomb people in tents, but they didn't just absolutely like kill everybody, which they could have done. They could have used atomic weapons. You know, you detonate them kind of high up in the air and they don't really irradiate the ground that badly, you know, they could, you know, and they do have them. So it's, but then people, you know, kind of hold that as, maybe we need two different words for it, right? Like there's completing an absolute annihilation of a people. And then there is, like what you just said, an attempted genocide and a genocide in progress, some kind of thing. But part of it is not just killing the people, but blowing up all of their hospitals, all their universities, all of their businesses, all of their markets, all of their everything, destroying, as you're put, blowing up the government offices that have all of the papers, the land deeds, and all the records, and all the everybody's, you know, educational and medical and whatever, you know, personal important papers that they have, everything, you know, registered with their pseudo state there, all of that just completely destroyed, their registries and whatever, entire families wiped off the face of the earth. It is just a devastating thing. It's unbelievable what has been allowed to occur here.
And normalized. And this is the thing.
I just want to say one more thing here is I really recommend that people look at Katie Johnstone. She's a leftist writer from Australia. I'm sure you're familiar. Yeah. And she just had this great tweet the other day where she says, you know, this is what they said all along. They're like, oh no, we're only specifically targeting Hamas terrorists. And now they're saying, oh yeah, of course, Gaza's completely decimated. You can't expect the poor Palestinians to exist here. We have to cleanse them for their own good. And she had, you know, 100 little or whatever, 25 little points. This is what they spun it as for the last year and 3 months. And then now this is what they say, that yes, of course, you critics were right all along about the absolute level of devastation, the Dresden level of devastation visited upon these poor people. And then that becomes the excuse to cleanse them.
Yes.
Oh yeah, the poor Palestinians, we're crying crocodile tears. We love them and care about them so much now. You know what we should do? We should move them all to Saudi Arabia so that they can be free. Like, come on. I just read that one this morning. If just the page on antiwar.com today is a nightmare. The first like 10 stories on antiwar.com today are just blah. And one of them is Netanyahu says, yeah, move them to Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia says, yeah, right. And this is where I'm sure I think maybe you were getting to this, that Egypt and Jordan won't take them.
No.
Right. So they have nowhere to cleanse these people. They're just going to push them all into the Sinai or push them all into the sea and drown them. What are they going to do with them? And what's really like horrible about this is you hear Zionists a lot. I see this a lot, and I heard it a lot. On the Tim Pool show, this lady Libby, somebody or other.
Oh God, yes.
Literally paraphrased, she paraphrased Adolf Hitler to me and said, look, see, nobody wants them. And that proves that I'm right about them. You know, which is exactly what Hitler said about the Jews after the Evian conference, like word for word, Libby Emmons. But the thing is, it's not that the Palestinians all are terrorists or have tuberculosis or whatever it is. It's that if all of the Muslims are cleansed out of Palestine, then they lose every last claim on the holy sites there. And now they're going to blow up the mosque and rebuild the third temple and all of this stuff, right? So that's what it all comes down to when you're talking about the national governments of these other states. That's why they, you know, it's not that they hate the Palestinians and don't want them around. It's that it would be overall, broadly speaking, the Ummah withdrawing their still latent possession of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock and all that stuff, which is, of course, everything. And if the Israelis blow all that up and rebuild the third temple, now you're going to have World War IV or V or whichever we're on now.
Yeah, I mean, the Arabic countries have already received hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees since the Nakba. And people, if we want to put the statistics now, Syria received 500,000 Lebanon received 500,000. Egypt has, I believe, 200,000.
There
And
used to be 250,000 in Kuwait before Arafat took Saddam's side in the war, and they got kicked out after that.
And Jordan, a very big portion of the population are Palestinians. So, I mean, there is something that many people miss in this conversation, and that is Palestinians are Palestinians. Why would they live in Egypt or in Jordan or in Saudi Arabia?
Well, there are all these Muslim countries. Why don't they just go there? Like, well, there are all these European countries. Why don't the Israelis just go back to where they're from?
This is something that I ask myself.
In Germany.
Yeah. I mean, I ask myself this question when I watch this podcast and these talking heads spew such ridiculous things. And how could these people become experts on issues, right? Like how would they have big platforms and podcasts and have opinions about something they have no clue about? Like, I feel in the United States, there are so many big podcasts have no clue what they are talking about. I mean, if they are successful in some business, it doesn't mean they are now successful in geopolitics. Like, they're making so ridiculous points. Like, for us as indigenous people of the region, when we watch them, it horrifies us because it shows how much ridiculousness exists in the literature, in the American literature among these people talking, and they are justifying a lot of the colonial, let's say, aspirations of the United States by word salad and twisting the words and trying to justify everything, basically doing hasbara. Now, under the Biden administration, it was quite clear that they're going to support Netanyahu and they cannot back off. Like, they will support it. There are no red lines. There were only few red lines, and Netanyahu crossed every red line. And then everybody told us, now if Trump comes to power, Trump will put an end to it, and he's the tough man. He will strike a deal, and he wants for peace and prosperity in the region, etc., etc. And now Trump says, I will own Gaza myself. We will bring the Palestinians out. We will make like beautiful resorts there, and the birds are in the blue skies, and everything will be fine. I mean, what was your take about this out of the box plan, Trump plan?
I don't know who's filling his head with this stuff, but I'm sure he did not talk to the Pentagon about this first. And he just doesn't know much about the thing at all. Like, at first I hoped that he was just kidding. What he was really trying to do was get Egypt to take control of Gaza back like it was before 67 or something like that, get the Saudis and the Qataris to volunteer to come in and rebuild the place or something. But the thing is, it's on the page at antiwar.com today. It's from his interview yesterday, I guess. Or here, I have it here. He says, he reiterated that he's committed to it. He says it would be a big mistake to allow the Palestinians to return after he's done getting rid of them. It's a big mistake to allow the Palestinians or the people to be living in Gaza to go back yet another time. We don't want Hamas going back. Think of it as a big real estate site, Trump said. He calls it a demolition site, whatever. And then, but the thing about this is that, first of all, it doesn't sound like, this is this even 2D chess where he's like trying to make a move and get someone else to make the counter move and do it for him or whatever. It doesn't seem like that. He seems to mean what he says there. However, he's completely detached from reality. He has no explanation for how he's going to get rid of these Palestinians who will not go. They just, as we already discussed, survived a year and 3 months of bombing by Israel. And now, because of Trump's ceasefire, hundreds of thousands of them or more maybe have already returned to the north. You don't have to cleanse them all over again. There's no way to do it short of B-52 carpet bombing. Like if you're picturing images of Nixon carpet bombing Vietnam, just dropping every dumb bomb out of the belly of these massive planes, something like that. Otherwise, they're just going to hide in the rubble and snipe you. You're going to send in the Marine Corps or the U.S. Army. They're going to be in the exact same position the IDF was in, unable to win, fighting in absolute like horror show urban combat of Baghdad circa 2006 or worse. And they don't want to do that. And, the polls say 13% of Americans support this. W. Bush had 60, 70% of people afraid that Saddam had done 9/11 and was going to do it again if we didn't stop him before he sent the 3rd Infantry Division into Iraq. Trump has absolutely no support for this at all. It's completely crazy. And he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. He essentially just does like yada, yada, yada over how we're going to get the Palestinians to get out of the way. He doesn't ever explain it. He says, at one point, he said, well, you know, after the fighting stops, implying that it's about to resume again. But according to his peace deal, the Israelis just withdrew from the, I forgot how to pronounce it, starts with the N corridor, where they had bisected the Gaza Strip. They just withdrew from there on American orders, essentially, or you know, complying with American wishes, with Trump's wishes, just yesterday. They finished that. And so they're just in no position whatsoever. I mean, I'll tell you, man, right after October 7th and the war started, or the, you know, invasion, bombing campaign, slaughter, whatever you want to call it, Ramzi Baroud wrote a piece for antiwar.com. He's a refugee from Gaza, and from before that, Israel proper, as they call it, used to be Palestine, and then Gaza. Now he's a leftist intellectual and a brilliant guy, and has written all these books about it and stuff. And he wrote a piece for us at antiwar.com that said the Israelis have already lost. And he said, and here is his thinking. We saw this movie before in 2014. They didn't just bomb the place. They sent the army in there, and the army decided they didn't like getting shot and blown up. And so they turned around and left. And the problem is, you bomb the place, you're just creating concrete slabs for dudes to hide behind and snipe you. And so it's an incredibly unforgiving terrain for the IDF or the United States or anybody else to invade and try to take from the population there. They really only need small arms. I don't know if you saw this Qassam gun thing where it's like a RPG, but it's like a shotgun RPG, right? It's not a rocket propelled grenade. It's like a shotgun propelled grenade. So this is like some slapped together tech, and it's perfectly effective for taking out even tanks and stuff. And so the IDF had a real hard time. They lost hundreds of soldiers and they withdrew. And now they got the status quo plus rubble. But overall, they did not dislodge Hamas in any sense. And so is the IDF going to go back in there and actually finish the job this time at the cost of thousands and thousands of their men? Or Trump's going to give them B-52 heavy bombers to use? Or what? They're not going to be able to do it. So I guess I'm sorry for rambling, but my point being, Trump doesn't know what he's talking about. It's not that he has a horrific, nefarious plan that he's going to implement here. He's completely pie in the sky nonsense here. And soon reality is going to intrude on that nonsense, and there will be a different plan, because no, America is not taking possession of the Gaza Strip. We're just not. It's not going to happen. There's no way. And the U.S. Marine Corps, they've got to be telling him, Mr. President, you don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. Come on.
Scott, I've been following the Maga movement for quite some time, and I found there is one component in the Maga movement, people who are very anti-Israel, they are America first, this is what they say about themselves, or this is how they identify. And they have been criticizing Israel's influence over the US foreign policy, AIPAC, the people in the Congress being bought by the Israel lobby, the press in the United States. There's so many components or so many factors that Israel is influencing in the domestic and foreign policy affairs of the US-Israel relationship, US foreign policy towards the Middle East, etc. And now that Trump presented this ridiculous plan of relocating or sending the Palestinians away for reconstruction, and then we see what happens. They say that this is a 4D chess by Trump, and that Trump is basically playing against Netanyahu, and finally he will pull the rug or the curtain from under the feet of Netanyahu. And one of the people who made a video about this case, his name is Jan Karol, and Jan he made an account last year, 2024, and in 1 year he gained 1 million followers by exposing the Israel influence over the US foreign policy. And he made this video, and I would like to show you, because this video has gone very viral recently on X. And in this video, he explains what is beyond the verbal, or what is beyond the words of Trump, and he believes that there's a genius idea behind it. I would like to show you this. It was around 10 minutes, and I shortened it to 4 minutes. So let's watch it together, and I would like your comment about it.
Trump and Bibi's relationship has been strained lately. It's been weird. Trump has recently reshared Jeffrey Sachs calling Netanyahu a deep, dark son of a bitch. Trump has snubbed Bibi on a number of occasions, and Bibi did not attend Trump's inauguration after Trump said some stuff that maybe caused some friction. It's hard to say. And then the internet started to notice that it doesn't look like Trump told Bibi about this announcement before the press conference where he announced it. Here, check this out.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site, and get rid of the...
Obviously, you got to watch that for yourself and come up with your own interpretation. Bibi is trying to stay behind a poker face. It's hard to tell what he's thinking. But based on his body language, I think there's at least a reasonable chance that he didn't know about this in advance. And if that's true, it kind of forces a reassessment of what's going on here. But let's do our best to step into Trump's shoes and look at this from something like his perspective and try to figure out what he thinks is going on. And I'm not saying I endorse this, and I'm not saying that I think that Trump is right. I don't have a good solution, because any solution where you let Palestine and Israel keep doing what they're doing will inevitably end in more bloodshed. It just will. Either you move all the Jews out and you get rid of Israel, and that's full of bloodshed and problems, or you let Israel ethnically cleanse and genocide Gaza, and that's duh. And so what Trump is doing is he's stepping in and putting the American military in Gaza and taking Gaza as an American space. And if you really think about it, that actually takes a huge amount of power away from Israel if you do that with a uncorrupted American government. In order to be uncorrupted, you'd have to do things like shut down USAID, hamstring the CIA, arrest Jeffrey Epstein, you know? You'd also have to expose their media control over the narrative, so that way we can have an
This is completely stupid. How long is this?
And if you did all that and put American boots on the ground in Gaza, not only
1 minute more left.
would Israel no longer be able to raid Palestinian homes in the middle of the night and take children prisoner for no reason, they wouldn't be able to carpet bomb civilian infrastructure because it'd be full of Americans. They wouldn't be able to block foreign aid into the country because it would be Americans. They wouldn't be able to gang rape Palestinians because they'd be protected by Americans. They wouldn't be able to occupy and continuously settle more and more land, in at least in Gaza, potentially not in the West Bank, because it would be Americans. And Hamas, which has been propped up by Israel and the corrupt deep state here in order to continue and perpetuate this conflict, would no longer be in control in order to perpetuate this conflict.
So as you see, like those are big like names nowadays being circulated in the United States. We're talking about 2.1 million views, and this has gone very viral. And I've seen many Maga supporters saying exactly the same thing. And this is in favor of the Palestinians. And now that if the Americans occupy Gaza, then the Gulf countries have to deal directly with the United States, and they don't have to deal with Israel. And now Israel cannot continue the genocide because there is an American forces there, and the Americans will dictate the outcome of this. Like, can we really separate between the Israeli strategy in Gaza and the American strategy in your
No,
opinion?
of course not. That guy has no idea what he's talking about. I don't know who that is, but he's a complete idiot. He has no idea what he's talking about. The American Army and Marines are not going to occupy the Gaza Strip. And if they do, the plan will be to turn the Strip over to Israel. So we're going to move a bunch of Americans there? The whole point is to cleanse the place, to give it to Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud to resettle with Israeli Jews. The hell, that guy doesn't obviously know anything about this topic at all. So, but I dispute what you say, though, about like all the MAGA guys believe in this, because I don't think so. I saw, I think probably a majority of the sort of new right pro-Trump influencer types on X immediately revolted against this and said it was the stupidest, most horrible thing that they'd ever heard of. You just have to make, 4D, 5D, 6D chess to show that, what he's really doing is screwing Netanyahu over here. Yeah, right, dude. That's why he cashed a check for $100 million from Miriam Adelson, was to screw over the Likud, right? That was why
How
he
in-
moved the embassy to
how-
Jerusalem. That was why he recognized Netanyahu and the Likud seizure of the Golan Heights, or I guess it was Labor that seized the Golan Heights, but the Likud annexed it officially, and he recognized that. He's spent billions of dollars bribing the governments of Sudan, UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco to sign the ridiculous Abraham Accords, had that ridiculous deal of the century where America just gives tax money to and Qatari money to the Palestinians, so they accept never having citizenship or independence and just be happy living on their reservation. We'll build them a casino or something. This was Trump's foreign policy when it came to Israel-Palestine the last time he was the president for 4 years. And
how influential is Miriam over Trump's? Like, is 100 million like?
she clearly helped pick that cabinet. She paid him $100 million. He made a deal for that money, right? He didn't just say, "Oh, thanks. Maybe you'll buy some influence over me with your opinions, lady." They shook hands. And who is Miriam Adelson? She's an Israeli who married an American billionaire who, by the way, made his money on casinos in Macau in China. And so this is, the leaders of the American conservative movement, right, are Jewish casino owners from communist China and from Israel. And now Sheldon said his only regret in life is that he was in the U.S. Army instead of the IDF. He also said America should nuke Iran on the outskirts of Tehran to show them that we mean business and they better give in to us on everything. And then he died. And now, I read a thing about, she's the one who made him political in the first place. She clearly was like married him as an op to get control of his money and influence. And now he's dead and she's got all his money. And he spent $100 million last time. And now she's spending them again. And what did Trump say about Sheldon Adelson and his money? Sheldon Adelson's giving all this money to Marco Rubio to make Marco Rubio his perfect little puppet, because that's how it works, he says. And then he's taken at least $200 million from just that husband and wife since then. So what does that tell you? He's their perfect little puppet. As simple as that. Oh, yeah, no. What this really is American nationalism at Israel's expense, says the kook who just rambles and cites no reason to think that at all. It's completely ridiculous. And of course, like some idiot who knows nothing about it, who's been on Twitter for a year, has 1 million followers or whatever you said. I mean, who knows?
Why I brought this type of content to your attention, because Elon Musk amplifies these people. When they publish anything that is not related to Israel, he amplifies their work. And then when they speak about Israel, of course, he doesn't touch these issues, but it feels to me that there is a psychological operation going on. Like, these people present themselves as anti-Israel, and they gain popularity, 1 million, let's say, followers and millions of views of videos, and then they endorse a plan like this by Trump in order to manipulate the people to accept it, to say, give him a chance.
No, that, right? He just doesn't want to piss off his base, his audience, and so he's rationalizing it and explaining why it must be a good idea. Start with, it's a good idea. Now come up with why it must be, right? There's something else going on here that would explain this, that makes it good, because that's where his clicks come from, right? Like, I mean, I don't have any reason, maybe there's more to it, but I doubt that, like, he was sent here by anyone, right? It's just, that's where the clicks at, are staying good in MAGA. And so if MAGA goes off course, well, you just tell it why it's right to do so.
Yeah. You recently was on a podcast called Good Morning Liberty, and you said, I'm quoting you, Donald Trump was never a Russian agent. He is an Israeli agent. How much of a backlash did you receive after this?
Not much. I mean, it's a vigorous speech anyway, right? It's not like they took him in the back room, like Mossad, like blackmailed him and told him, you work for us now or whatever. But look, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, look, I don't know. I mean, it comes down to it. Like, what is exactly the difference between a Mossad asset and a Syrian and a this and that and whatever? And like, maybe he is compromised. I don't know. Maybe he is blackmailed and controlled, or maybe they did some favors for him and whatever. If you read any books about covert action, like most conspiracy kookery is kookery, but then again, like intelligence agencies, that is their job, is conspiring stuff and getting away with it in secret and all that. So like, there's a bit of unprovability to all of that. But I mean, does it really matter, right? Like, how about Jared Kushner is extremely Zionist and Donald Trump doesn't give a damn, right? And so, like, he's got this guy who is, his family is extremely close to Benjamin Netanyahu and the Likud. According to the New York Times, Netanyahu would come and sleep in Jared Kushner's bed. He'd go sleep in the basement when Netanyahu came to visit, or at least that happened one time, I think more than that. And you got Trump. People go, oh, Trump's an anti-Semite. Trump's he's such a racist, white supremacist, or whatever. Like, okay, like let's just pretend for the sake of argument that like if you come from his neighborhood in Queens, you're like a little bit prejudiced against the Jews. Okay, well, I guarantee he hates Arabs 10 times more than that. So what? Back to the clip you just played. He's doing all this because he loves the Palestinians so much. He's going to do all these wonderful favors for them, huh? Right. No. Yeah, he has, no reason whatsoever to do the right thing by them at all. He doesn't care at all. And no one ever told him that, like, hey, Israel sins is why September 11th happened, and you're going to cause the next one with this. Nobody told him that. That was radical Islam. That wasn't blowback from CIA foreign policy from supporting Israel. That was just they hate us for our freedom because their religion says so or whatever. We never had a reckoning on that question. And so the next big attack, they still won't attribute to blowback, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I guarantee you, well, I don't guarantee, but I bet you that if we ever get a hold of the transcripts of the videos of that New Orleans attacker from New Year's Eve, that he went on and on about the war in the Gaza Strip in there. I bet you he did. And they're going to, they're trying to suppress that. I don't know if the open records laws are going to mean that eventually it has to come out or not. But he apparently videotaped these, manifesto rants on his way to New Orleans while he was driving there. And they're keeping that under wraps. But guarantee you that's backdraft, immediate. If blowback is the long-term consequences of secret foreign policies, then backdraft is the immediate consequences of overt foreign policies. Like here, Israel, here's some bombs to murder children with. And then some guy runs over a bunch of people on Bourbon Street. And it's a pretty much one-to-one causation there. It happens a lot. And I know, and I'm one of the experts on this, the FBI has framed up a lot of people on bogus terrorism cases, but there have been some very real terrorism cases in this country as well, including San Bernardino, Orlando, the guy that bombed the sidewalks near the marathon in New Jersey and New York. It was a very real plot to bomb the subway in New York that the FBI stopped, a guy named Zazi. There were a couple of fake ones, but there was one very real one. So, and then you had New Orleans on New Year's. There was the Corpus Christi and Pensacola Naval Station attacks and so forth. So America's lousy with soft targets and our government continues to put the American people at risk supporting these policies. And I'm sure that no one has ever explained that to Trump. They're like, virtually all suicide bombers come from places that are being occupied by others. No one ever explained that to him.
Speaking of terrorism, have you heard of Richard Medhurst being detained again by, this time, the Austrian police? I just want to shed light on this for the audience. So Richard Medhurst himself posted a video, said, I was detained this week by the Austrian police and intelligence services. They raided my house, office, and took all my devices. They are accusing me of being a member of Hamas and threatened me with 10 years in prison. So not only a member of Hamas, they accused him of being a member of Qassam Brigade. And also they accused him of being part of a network that is trying to spread the caliphate in Europe. And the guy is a Christian.
I know. I was about to say, is he a Christian at Hearst? Yeah, they're liars. I mean, the guy is a leftist and a critic of Israel and a media personality, Give me a break. There's no indication whatsoever that he has any loyalty to any militia in Palestine whatsoever. If he was, it would be like the the Popular Front, right? The leftists, not Hamas,
Yes.
the right-wing Islamists, you know.
And
But anyway,
indeed, me and him, we have Syrian roots, right? Like we come from Syria, basically, and we're fighting against this so-called Islamic Caliphate of Jolani,
supported by Israel and the United
it's
States.
supported by Israel and the United States. And the fans or the supporters of HTS Jolani, they are demonstrating here in the streets of Europe freely, raising the flags of HTS and everything, and nobody is coming after them for charges of terrorism. And nobody is asking them if they would like to go back to Syria, since they liberated Syria for them from the Assad tyranny. I mean, this is the topic I would like to ask you finally. What do you think what happened in Syria? Like, why the regime change was reactivated all of a sudden after they put it on the shelf for quite some time?
Yeah. Well, I think I don't know, like the exact thinking and the order of events behind exactly how it happened. I guess I have to presume that America, Israel, and Turkey decided to launch the attack out of the Idlib province and the assault. I don't know that for sure, but it doesn't seem like Al Qaeda would have done that without the Turks, you know, running the whole thing for them. And I don't think the Turks would do that without checking with Uncle Sam. So, like, yeah, that clearly was. Not clearly, but, you know, almost certainly was a combined operation of our governments working together to do that. And I don't know that it had anything to do with the election and the change of power between Biden and Trump. I would think that that was not it. But it could just very well be that they really thought that now's their chance, that maybe this was the plan all along. They had really, I don't know the degree to which, but they dealt Hezbollah a real blow with that pager attack and with their bombing campaign there. So Hezbollah had, I believe, virtually all come home from Syria at that time and were not there to protect the regime at all. I'm not sure about the status of the Iranians, but they mostly only had like advisors there and limited number of special operations type troops, even if you go back to 10 years ago. And then, of course, the Russians are busy in Ukraine. And so they had, you know, much more limited forces there to help protect Assad. And then also the sanctions regime and the occupation of their oil fields and their wheat fields and everything for the last 10 years has really weakened the Syrian government and their ability to pay and upkeep their army. So the SAA was really like AWOL in a lot of places. And so I think possibly they just took their opportunity to go ahead and follow through. The motive, of course, being, as they explained, the motive being Assad being an Alawite and allied with the Shiites and allied with Iran, helped Iran to support Hezbollah. And that was his real sin. And that's why they had to get rid of him. As David Wormser wrote back in 1996, we have to expedite the chaotic collapse to Syria. And then we can remake the state in a way better to our liking in the end.
20 minutes before.
And he says, oh, yeah, Islamist terrorism, that is a concern, but we'll just have to find better allies than the Baathists to fight against that. And then now here we are, literally putting Al Qaeda in Iraq, in Syria, on the throne in Damascus. It's just incredible. It's unbelievable. What can I say?
20 minutes before the live streaming, Netanyahu made a statement on a breaking news says the killing of Nasrallah shattered the axis of evil and led to the fall of Assad, after which we were able to control the Golan Heights. So
and they even took control of Mount Hernon. They invaded what, 30 miles or 40 miles of Syria. And who knows what the limits are on Greater Israel? You know, I don't know.
But would Trump tolerate HTS government in Damascus? I mean, we have also Tulsi Gabbard, who was in Damascus, and she visited the country. Yeah. She knows exactly the nature of this so-called HTS.
I mean, this is what I'm saying. I agree with you. Look, I think you know, again, it's just like a syllogism or whatever. I don't have like proof, but just thinking it through. Can America really tolerate a bin Ladenite state, an avowed bin Ladenite state in Syria? Maybe they can. I mean, the public relations is that this guy Jelani is nothing but Erdogan or King Abdullah or King Salman at this point anyway. He's not any more Islamist than them. And so it'll be fine. This is what I have a quote in my book about, in a couple of my books, I think maybe in all 3 books, I cite this. Sheila Heslin, NSC official working for Clinton, told the Congress, or I'm sorry, I may be misquoting, but anyway, as Clinton officials said that Oh yeah, no, when the Taliban take over Afghanistan, it'll be great. It'll be just like Saudi Arabia. There'll be a lot of Islamic law and stability and a pipeline. And so what's the problem? So that was the way the Clinton government saw supporting the Taliban's rise to power in Afghanistan in 1996 to quell the civil war between the warlords from the last war.
Yeah.
And then, so clearly, right, like they put this guy, Jelani, and I don't know if you know this, but I guess I'm sure you're up on all this stuff, that back 3-4 years ago, they started really laundering Jelani's reputation. They dressed him up in a monkey suit and interviewed him for Frontline. And I
Yeah.
interviewed Martin Smith, the producer for that Frontline show, who I knew from back in the Rock
Ah,
days. And I
nice.
barbecued his ass for being, doing this public relations stunt. But it was clear at the time that the Turks are rehabilitating this guy. He's going to finishing school, or he's going to public relations school. And they told him, stop cutting people's heads off. Okay. And stop doing suicide bombings, because that is just kills your public relations. But short of that, go ahead, dude.
Yeah.
Right. So then
They have developed.
that was under the old consensus. Now you got Donald Trump in there, and he's got Tulsi Gabbard in there, as you mentioned. So she hasn't been confirmed yet, but assuming she becomes the director of national intelligence, we can expect her to explain to Donald Trump exactly who these guys are. And you know what? Like, okay, go back to the caliphate when ISIS had seized eastern Syria and then rolled into western Iraq.
Yeah.
At that point, I was telling everybody we should just butt out now. This is the results of our intervention. Just stop. Even at the worst case scenario, just stop. But it's okay, because they're surrounded by enemies. They got the Iraqi Kurds, they got the Iraqi Shiites. Obviously, the Saudis and Jordanians don't hate them, but they're not going to let them in, right?
Yeah.
And then you've got the Syrian Arab Army and the Syrian Kurds, and I guess in the far north, Armenia and Azerbaijan are not going to let ISIS, make any headway there. And so they're surrounded by enemies, and they're completely nutso, right? Like Patrick Coburn called ISIS the Islamist Khmer Rouge, right? Like these guys are going to burn themselves out and be dead and gone within a couple of years anyway. But that was 10 years ago when ISIS had conquered all of Western Iraq. But this is just totally different than that now.
Yeah.
They're not surrounded by enemies at all. They've got allies in Turkey in the north. They've got allies in Jordan and Israel in the south. And they're hemmed in possibly to a degree by the Syrian Kurds in the east, although they might be able to just march right past them anyway if they wanted to go back into Western Iraq. But their only real enemy would be Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and they're not coming. Right. And they whooped Assad. They drove him out of the country in 10 days. So he's gone. There's nobody for Iran and Hezbollah to come and fight for anymore. Right. The state is over. And so here Al-Qaeda has a state that is not in any danger of being destroyed by anyone anytime soon.
They are the danger, actually. They're attacking.
America invades because it is a bin Ladenite state. And how long do we expect? In fact, this is another thing. I don't know if people are extrapolating this out, but if Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani is going to be this much of a sock puppet of the Israelis and the Americans, then eventually he's going to get his head lopped off. There's going to be a coup because his government is a bin Ladenite government. They are extremely, they're radicals. I don't know. Murray Rothbard says once the radical seizes the capital city, he becomes a conservative. But still, like a lot of these guys are pretty nuts. And I would expect that if Jelani's going to kowtow that badly, then they'll just replace him. And then what are we going to do? We're going to tolerate a real bin Ladenite state just because that's what Israel wants. Israel prefers Al-Qaeda to the Alawites, to the secular Alawite regime. And so we do too. Man, I don't know if that can last through 4 years, the status quo that Joe Biden left us. I don't know if that can last. And I am in favor of Tulsi Gabbard being absolutely paranoid beyond reason about Al-Qaeda reaching out and touching Americans here. I am extremely paranoid about that myself. I don't think that we can back Israel in committing the kinds of sins that they have been committing without paying for it with terrorist attacks against the United States. And I hope that she just absolutely is obsessed all day long, every day with keeping those guys the hell out of here and away from our people. But is she going to advise Trump that he's got to invade Syria and smash this state? Replace it with what? I mean, what can you say, man? It's already gone this far. I really don't know what
there is no plan. There is no American plan to crush 40,000.
Force. There's no one for them to back. The Syrian Kurds, you could give the Syrian Kurds everything we've got. It's not going to be enough to stop these guys, you know?
Yes, I mean, ethnically speaking, the Kurds are very minority in Syria. They will not be able to win in a battle against HTS. And HTS now, we have American forces in the country, Turkish forces in the country, we have Israeli occupation in the country, but they're not attacking any of these occupations. They're attacking Lebanon now because they want to open a front line against Hezbollah. And this has been the plan all along in 2011, that a proxy force, an Islamist Salafist Takfiri group, goes to Lebanon and fights against Hezbollah so that Israelis would not go into ground invasion to Lebanon. And now the HTS will try to ignite such a confrontation with Hezbollah. Let's see how this will develop, and we will definitely cover it. But until then, I would like to thank you a lot, Scott, for this brilliant conversation today on Syriana Analysis. This was your first time on the show, and I would love to have you in the near future for follow-up conversations with you. Your insight is very important. You're coming from the United States, and also from a libertarian, let's say, perspective, this is more important. If I was living in the United States, I would definitely be part of your movement, guys, there. I would associate myself a lot with the foreign policy thinking that you guys have there, and I find it really noble for your country and also for our countries, because your foreign policy basically is our also affair, you know, because the foreign policy of the United States is like the nose is in our affairs all the time. So we care about what's going on in the US because it affects us directly in our homes, basically in our land and in our sovereignty and everything. So thank you so much for coming to the show and sharing your insights.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
And thank you so much, guys, for tuning in to today's live streaming. Tomorrow on Tuesday is going to be another live streaming for sure. Until then, I wish you peace for you and for your family. Peace be upon you as well, Scott. And we will see you soon. Salam.